Hi, I'm Mike Makovsky, the CEO of JINSA. I'm here in JINSA's office in Washington, D.C. And with me is Svante Cornell, leading Turkish expert and also director of the Central Asia Caucasus Institute at Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. And Svante also just wrote an article for us about Turkey. Turkey, as many of you know, is a very important country in the Middle East. There's been turmoil there recently. It has also historically been a close U.S. ally and has been a part of NATO also for many years. So what happens in Turkey is very important to the United States. In addition, the Prime Minister of Turkey is one of President Obama's closest confidants. President Obama speaks to Prime Minister Erdogan supposedly probably more than almost anybody else, any other world leader, I believe. In any case, since late May, there have been hundreds of thousands of Turks demonstrating in the streets, initially triggered by the raising of a park in central Istanbul. What really were these demonstrations about, or have they been about?
Well, yeah, it started out about being about a park, but it very quickly became about something very different, which the park symbolized, which was Prime Minister Erdogan's increasingly not only authoritarian policies. I mean, we all know by now that there are more journalists in jail in Turkey than in any other country. There have been trials against dissidents, army officers, and journalists and academics that have been largely on trumped-up charges. Hundreds of people have been put in jail. So it's the authoritarianism, but it's also that Erdogan has, in the last couple of years, become first of all, more erratic, and also more returned to the Islamism of his youth, if you will, in terms of interfering into people's lives. It's not just about the politics anymore. It's about telling people how many children they should have, going so far as to unilaterally proclaim what the Turkish national drink is, and whether or not opera houses should be built or not, and stuff that really lies outside the perimeter of what the Prime Minister normally should deal with. So people are feeling that there's an encroachment into their personal lives. There was an opinion poll right after the protest started in which over 50% of Turks said that they feel that the government is interfering too much into their lives. And this is very much about Erdogan personally. So I'd say more than a protest against the government or the AKP as such, it was a protest against Erdogan as a leader and the way he is leading the country.
And actually, we have in JINSA a number of many U.S. military folks, retired, certainly retired senior officers involved with our organization. A number of their friends have actually been put in jail by Prime Minister Erdogan in recent years. Is that right, or what? Well,
I think the figure is that's about 17% of Turkish flag officers, admirals, and generals are in jail. Turkey can't replace the head of the Navy because all admirals are in jail. So it's getting to quite a ridiculous situation in which actually affects the country's national security, that when Erdogan started ratcheting up the pressure against Bashar al-Assad in Syria, it was a little bit hollow because he didn't really have an army that could lead the country into a war, which he was otherwise, potentially threatening with. So, and then you actually saw Erdogan backtrack and say that he was against some of those convictions of army officers, and nothing came of that.
So, getting back to what do you think the Erdogan's response, which has been to these demonstrations, which has been seemingly both erratic but mostly heavy-handed? What has it said about his? What does it say?
Well, I think first of all, a former member of Parliament in Turkey for the AKP told me that this is a textbook.
The AKP is a ruling party.
The ruling party. A former member of Parliament for the ruling party, for Erdogan's party, said that this is a textbook case of how you don't handle a crisis. There were many opportunities for Erdogan to basically calm tensions. On several occasions, if he had just had a relatively calm rhetoric, things would have sizzled up. But instead, he never missed an opportunity to make matters worse by very harsh, disdainful rhetoric against the protesters, that also reminded to people what Erdogan keeps saying for the past number of years, which is that I want half of the vote, I want 50% of the vote, and I can do whatever I want. It's this majoritarian approach, very technical approach to democracy, in which the other 50% don't matter. If you won the election, you don't need to care about minorities, you don't need to care about dissidents, people who disagree with you, but they're just supposed to adapt to your policies and to your priorities. That's his vision. That became very, very blatant to people. And then, of course, it was the excessive use of force by the police that really made people in other cities around the country raise up in solidarity with the demonstrators in Istanbul. I'd say those were among the most important elements in his reaction. Of course, the conspiratorial nature of his way of blaming the protests, saying that they had been planned long in advance by this very unlikely coalition of forces, whether it be foreign media, the interest rate lobby, whoever that is, and increasingly lately we've also seen some more directly anti-Semitic statements by leading Turkish politicians in Erdogan's government.
He has been prime minister for about a decade now, and I think has increasingly in recent years felt unchecked in his power. But now, given these demonstrations, how do you see his political future?
Well, you're right about the unchecked, that up until about 2007-8, the old Kemalist Turkish establishment, which was mainly the military and the judiciary system, were kind of not perhaps a democratic form of checks and balances, but at least it was a check against Erdogan's power. But after he more or less neutralized those threats, partly by throwing people in jail, partly by a referendum that helped him get control over the judiciary, he's been unhinged, if you will. That he's increasingly he's been unwilling to listen to advice, and his own conservative movement is increasingly split, and he's increasingly I wouldn't say marginalized, but there is increasing opposition to him from important voices even within the Islamic conservatives,
including the president. Right?
For first and foremost the president, but also the fact that even the parliamentary group, he doesn't really command the entire AKP parliamentary group. So, and that's important because going forward now it's a little bit like if a bubble has burst, that Erdogan was seen to be, first of all, a lucky politician, everything went his way for 10 years, a strong politician that, and also a very skilled one. But even within his support base, I think there is general agreement that he didn't handle the crisis well. And over the past 2 years, for the first time, you see him actually being out of sync with the Turkish population. Two of his major priorities have been strongly opposed by a majority of Turks. Number one, the Syria policy, the very activist Turkish involvement in Syria. People don't support that. And secondly, his attempts to change the constitution to become president in a constitution that would make Turkey similar to Russia, basically a Putin-like presidency that controls everything without checks and balances. People don't want that either, and he's been pressing forward on these two issues, irrespective of the fact that he doesn't have support from the people. And that going forward, I think, means that we may come to look back at this as the beginning of the end, if you will, for not Erdogan perhaps as a politician, but at least of his, one-person domination of Turkey. Increasingly, that I think these protests have showed that that's not feasible. One man cannot run Turkey the way he's doing it.
So, finally, what do you think the implications are for U.S. policy of what the demonstrations are? The Obama administration has generally showed support for Erdogan during these demonstrations. What do you think going forward, what the implications are, and what you said about his future?
Well, on the one hand, the U.S. has a long-standing policy of not involving itself into internal Turkish affairs, going back, to when our allies in the military were also behaving in ways that were less than democratic at various occasions. And I think to some extent you're seeing a continuity in that sense. At the same time, what's different is what you mentioned, the very unique relationship between Obama and Erdogan. I assume by at this point that President Obama regrets having publicly named Erdogan as one of the 5 foreign leaders in which he has developed the most friendship and trust. It doesn't really look good at this point after Erdogan's recent behavior. But I think more importantly, there has been this single-handed focus that the Turkish-American relationship is between these two men. That's really where important issues have been handled, and that means that at some point, people like President Gül have been kind of sidelined. Other influential forces in the government have also been sidelined because the perception has been, if you want something done, talk to Erdogan. I think what's important going forward is that if Erdogan's bubble has been burst, number one, and second, if we look at the way he has behaved, it's very possible that in the future he's going to resort again to repression and to violence, excessive uses of force. That means that he may increasingly become a liability for US policy, which means, so what do? You still need to work with Turkey. It's an important regional power. I'm not saying you marginalize Erdogan. He's the prime minister. You have to deal with him. But you don't deal only with him. To the extent that you can, for example, President Obama could easily pick up the phone and talk to President Gül from time to time, not only talk to Erdogan. After all, he's the president of the country. And also, you can see, you could easily imagine greater engagement by the US of other elements, both within the, what is now the dominant force in Turkish politics, the Islamic conservative movement. There are more liberal and less liberal forces. So we need to find a way to, I think, to identify who are the more pluralistic, the more democratic forces within that movement, which tend to be the people aligned right now with President Gül, and who are the forces that are really, frankly, not very helpful to Turkey's own stability and to our interests, including regional interests. And there, I think, Prime Minister Erdogan, his Foreign Minister Ahmet Davutoğlu, and a bunch of other people are really not, in principle, working for interests that are compatible with America's interests.
Thank you very much, Svante. Thank you for joining us. You could watch this video again if you like. It'll be loaded on our website, jinsa.org, and it's also going to be on YouTube. Thank you very much. Bye.